Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next lesson in the 12 Days of Astro. We are going to be talking very briefly about the descendant, and then we're going to be talking about another axis of calculated points, which is the IC and the MC. So the descendant is one particular point that I would like to delve into further. I am a Libra rising, and it does mean that I'm very fascinated by the seventh house because my seventh house is in Aries, and it's also where my North Node is. So figuring out this idea of interdependence and interconnection rather than codependence or total dependence. It's a subject that I wish to do more research on. And in the meantime, it's one that I like to bring up in our sessions together with clients because we exist on this sort of axis spectrum continuum. I prefer the visual of a circle than a pendulum line. But anyway, with Scorpius, fake name, real person, their ascendant is in Capricorn, which means that their descendant, which is like if the ascendant is ourself and this sort of like guiding force, our ship, our helm of our ship, I should say, of the first house, the descendant is the other. And it's like the other half of ourselves. A lot of this astrological lineage comes from the Hellenistic astrology period. And so we rely on Greek mythology quite a bit. And the ancient Greeks at one point believed that the gods created humans as these like two-headed, four-armed, four-limbed beings that, because they got too big for their britches, were split in half. And this seems to be a theme with a lot of gods. It's like, okay, we'll just cut you in half. See how you like it. So I like to evoke this myth or this creation story. And when we talk about the descendant, be like, okay, it's not one particular person that you're looking for or we're looking to talk about necessarily. It's more so the qualities, the attributes, so that Cancer vibe, that Cancer setting, that Cancer sign for Scorpius in the seventh is very much like, okay, this is your counterbalance. This is your counterweight. This can be people who embody these traits that balance us by opposing us. So I like to talk about and think about oppositions from this perspective that like you care about the same thing with the exact same veracity and tenacity, but you have wildly opposing views. And you're such necessary pieces of that puzzle. Because if we just took one side away, one argument or one perspective away, we'd be doing ourselves a disservice to the cause, the value, the issue. So that's the descendant. And, I'd probably ask Scorpius about like relationships of all types. Who do you find that you're drawn to? What sort of archetypes do you notice come into your life through the physical manifestation of like people, friendships, business, vendors, etc. And how do they like oppose you? How do they get under your skin a little bit because you guys care at the same rate? You are like moving at the similar pace, and yet you're not agreeing on things. And why is that? That to me is that opposition. And I think looking for it within ourselves too, like, okay, if I am part of this bigger whole of like two people, who am I in that? Then we would talk about the IC and the MC, which are on an axis together. So the IC is like this felt sense of tradition, of refuge. Where do I feel safe? John O'Donohue, a Irish philosopher and poet, who I listen to a lot of, talked about this place within us that has never felt pain, has never been hurt. And I think what he's talking about there is the IC, which is often synonymous with this concept of the inner child. And it's like, what did your inner child want? Because they are still there, still within, and they like have this very almost like I think what was being evoked was like an Eden, where it's like it's always safe there. And how do we access that? How do we get to that again? And I wanted to use Scorpius's chart, again, fake name, real person, because there I see an MC are slightly shifted from mine and what is potentially more typical, which is to say that their IC is in the 5th house, which is the house of like creation, creativity, joys, pleasures. And their MC is in Scorpio in the 11th, which is our patrons, our benefactors, the audiences that interact with our 10th house, which is that public self, and that sort of like vocational calling. So the MC is the actual calculation point that says this is, the 10th house for Scorpius is a place of calling, is a place of vocation. And yet their audience is where they are going to have this felt sense of publicity. And this is the part of the chart that is going to be most recognizable to other people. So people that know Scorpius, they're going to know them kind of by their audience, potentially. So let's take a quick look at Scorpius's chart. Okay, so this is Scorpius's chart. We have seen this chart before for a couple of days of the 12 days of Astro. And we're back again because I really wanted to highlight that the MC and the IC are typically in the 4th and 10th house, but they can be in the 3rd and the 9th. They can be in the 5th and the 11th, as we're seeing here. And I believe I've heard of them being even further afield, but I've not seen that personally. So if we were in a session together and this was your chart, in talking about the IC and the MC, we see here that the IC has got its own space. So what are those sort of like Tauran memories of childhood that are still very fulfilling? They replenish your cup. They are like a resource, an inner resource that you're like, oh, I remember feeling so loved, feeling so taken care of during this very Taurian moment. And by Taurian, I mean bucolic, I guess. And then conversely, we would look at the MC and I would probably start to ask questions like, how important is having an audience to you? What sort of transformation do people experience with you, and how readily are they able to access that? How much facilitation of transformation do you offer to the world? And it might be tricky to get an answer, just because a lot of what happens within that Scorpio setting is under the surface. And yet we can still, pick some locks, we can find some keys, and we can ask these questions that can point to, like, is this everything you want it to be? Is your public self something that you feel safe uncovering? Because if not, I'm not suggesting that Scorpius feels this way, but if not, this could be time to return to that safe space within us that hosts those good memories and those good like fantasies, those imaginations, those experiences as children that don't have to make sense to our adult world or our adult brain. And it could be a time to, especially with the eclipses happening in Scorpio and Taurus, until I think June of next year, there is this real focus, this real energy right now at the time of recording, in which the lunar nodes the transiting lunar nodes that everybody is experiencing are really bringing to light, what was the past like? What is my future looking like? In terms of like my visibility, being seen, being witnessed, being understood, being validated. How does that manifest? So that would be one of the sort of conversations that I would probably bring up if this were your chart. And then I'd hear what you have to say, which is probably the best part of these one-on-one client sessions. And hard to emulate, but this has been such a fun experiment to illustrate like what happens and what kind of things do we talk about in this setting. So that's where I'm going to leave things for the descendant and the IC and the MC. And we will see you soon for the next 12 days of Astro tutorial. Okay, bye everyone.